we have not only let down the Constitution, but we've let down the members of the Constituent Assembly. We've let down Dr. Ambedkar.
So we're ending up, and I'm repeating this perhaps for the fourth or fifth time, with the following conclusion. India has a good constitution. It's lasted 75 years. It's been malleable enough to adapt to the changing requirements over 7 decades, which is why it's accepted amendments. But, and that but is critical, at important moments of time, the constitution has been let down by the defiance, by the willfulness, by the dictatorial behavior of individuals who were elected to operate the constitution, whether it's Indira Gandhi in the 70s, whether, as you're suggesting, it's Narendra Modi at the moment, or whether it's other politicians at other times. At critical times, the Indian constitution has been let down by those very people whose job is to honor it, i.e. politicians, as well as often by those very people whose job is to defend it, i.e. judges. It's been let down by both.
Yeah. And also Parliament.
Parliament.
They are the people we are electing.
So, at the end of the day, Ambedkar was absolutely right.
Yeah, at the end of the
constitution can be rendered a poor product if the people operating it and defending it deliberately choose not to do so properly.
Right, absolutely. Dr. Ambedkar was spot on.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Tomorrow is the 75th anniversary of the Indian Constitution, a landmark few other constitutions can boast of. During this period, the Constitution has been both praised and criticized. Today, we examine both aspects. Has the Constitution been good for the country, or does it have weaknesses and flaws that have constrained our democracy? And how well has it been served by those whose job it is to honor it, but also defend it? Those are the issues I shall raise with one of the most highly regarded former judges of the Supreme Court, Justice Madan Lokur. Justice Lokur, tomorrow the Indian Constitution will be 75 years old. Given that the global average lifespan of a constitution is just 19 years, and secondly, none of the constitutions of our neighboring countries have lasted anywhere near as long, how significant a landmark is this?
Yes, good morning, Karan, and thank you. Yeah, the fact that our constitution has lasted so many years, I think the credit for that must go to the people. By people, I mean just about everybody. It's not only the parliament or the legislatures or the executive or the judiciary. It's the people. They have accepted what is written in the constitution. They have accepted the principles in the constitution. And, they have said that, we are accepting it. Not only because, great people had drafted the constitution in the Constituent Assembly debates, but because the constitution works for us and it is our constitution that we have given to ourselves. So I think it is very, very significant. It's not only our neighboring countries where the constitution has not lasted for many years, but there are several other countries also, where the constitution has not lasted for as long as 75 years. So when you talk about an average, you talk about an average not only in our region, but I think across the world. So we've done, I think, remarkably well.
Now, over the decades, the Constitution has had both its supporters as well as its critics. Some scholars have criticized it for being colonial. The RSS claims it's not rooted in an Indian ethos. But as you view the Constitution, has it been good for India?
Yes, it has been good for India in the sense that the people who I don't know whether administer is the right word, but the people who are concerned with the constitution, that is the judiciary, executive, legislature, that matters a lot. You see, there have been very serious constitutional transgressions, for example. When the executive is extremely strong. For example, you had the year when Indira Gandhi was the prime minister, right? You had Article 356, that is taking over the state government, so to speak, by the central government. You've had that used, several times. You've had the executive, again under Mrs. Indira Gandhi, amend the constitution and bring about the 38th Amendment, which said that her election could not be challenged, or the election of the prime minister could not be challenged. So you've had these, eras or years when the constitution has been, taken over, so to speak, by the executive to get things done which they wanted to be done, which may not necessarily have been good for the country or good for the constitution. In one sense, I think we are facing that problem today also. We faced it earlier. We are, in one sense, facing it today. I'm sure our constitution will, and the people, with the help of the people, will come out of the problems.
Now, unlike Britain and America, the Indian Constitution conferred universal adult suffrage at one go, regardless of creed, class, caste, education, or wealth. And that became the bedrock of India's democracy. How significant was that?
I think it's very significant. The principle of equality, which our constitution talks about, if everybody is equal, why should everybody not get the right to vote? Of course, you could have some, age limit kind of a thing. But what's wrong in, permitting everybody to vote, regardless of their religion, regardless of their caste, regardless of their gender? So I think it's a very progressive step that was taken by our Constituent Assembly, and it has proved to be good. Today we are talking about empowerment of women and how women voters are coming out in large numbers. All right, how did that happen? It happened because they were given the right to vote. It's another matter that not many of them exercised the right to vote earlier. But yeah, now they're exercising their right to vote and making a difference.
Now, over the 75 years of the existence of our Constitution, it's been amended 106 times. Do you view that as a source of strength, that it can be fashioned to change the demands of the day, or do you see it actually as proof of weakness?
I wouldn't say it's a proof of weakness. It has been amended 106 times, there's no doubt about it. But, some amendments are not very significant. All right. Maybe change of years, for example, instead of 10 years, you make it 20 years or something like that. Or you add, something to the ninth schedule. So many of these amendments, I can't put my finger on how many, but many of them are not consequential in that sense, in the sense of governance, right? But there have been some consequential amendments to the fundamental rights chapter. You know, bringing in municipalities and panchayats and all that. These have been significant amendments. But people say, and I think this is accepted by everybody, that the Constitution is a living document. It's an organic document. Okay. So as times change, you need to make changes with the times, depending upon what the situation is. Okay. So I don't think there's anything wrong in the fact that 106 amendments have been made. Like I said, some of them were not major amendments or, having a great constitutional governance, backdrop. But yeah, I think I'm quite happy with 106 amendments.
Let's at this point, Justice Lokur, come to some of the criticisms made of the Constitution. First of all, it said that the Constitution has strengthened the executive over the legislature, a tendency that's been exacerbated by the 10th schedule and by the way speakers of the Lok Sabha in particular have functioned. As a result, MPs have been subordinated to their party leadership, and the Speaker in India simply doesn't have the same authority that the Speaker at the British House of Commons has. How do you respond to that criticism?
You see, it's like this: if Parliament has subordinated itself to the executive, it is possible only if the Parliament allows itself to be subordinated to the executive. Like I mentioned about Mrs. Indira Gandhi, for example, a very strong Prime Minister. To some extent, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru also. All right. So Mrs. Gandhi could get things done in Parliament. Why? One, she was a strong person, a strong leader. And second, the representatives of the people, the Parliament, kind of succumbed to her whims and fancies. That's why you had something like the 38th Amendment. That is why you had something like the emergency. So we've had, times when the executive has been very strong, or the prime minister has been a person, of strength, and Parliament kind of, succumbs to that pressure. So it's not, you can't say it's only the executive that is responsible for this, but also the parliamentarians. The parliamentarians can certainly stand up and say, sorry, what is this 10th schedule all about? We don't want it, freedom of conscience. We would like to vote the way we want to, provided it's in line with the party line, but we are entitled to disagree.
If I understand you correctly, you're suggesting it's not the Constitution that has subordinated the legislature to the executive, but the way Parliament itself has functioned and the way the executive has dominated Parliament. Let me, therefore, in that context, cite to you what the scholar Gautam Bhatia has written. He says, the Indian Constitution conferred great power on the executive and trusted it to wield that power well instead of putting structural constraints upon it. And the point he's making is this. He's asking, was the Constitution mistaken in assuming that our rulers would be good men who would always act within the letter and the spirit of the Constitution? Clearly, they didn't always do that.
Yes. But, like I said, I wouldn't say that it's only the executive to blame, right? Parliament did. There is no doubt about it. I mean, so not Parliament, but the Constituent Assembly did put its faith on the rulers being good men and women. Dr. Ambedkar said that unequivocally. Dr. Rajendra Prasad, who was the president of the Constituent Assembly, also said that unequivocally, right? But good men and women, where do you need them? You need them in the executive, you need them in the legislature, you need them in the judiciary. Supposing you don't have good men and women in the judiciary who just succumb to pressure, like it happened during the emergency. What do? Can you say, well, it's because of the executive? No. In a situation like that, it's because of the judiciary having succumbed to it. What do you do if Parliament passes all kinds of laws without actually thinking about it? Again, you can't blame the executive. But certainly, because the executive controls Parliament in the sense that you have the Prime Minister belonging to the executive, belonging to the political executive. To some extent, if you were to give the blame, I would say maybe 51, 52% would be on the executive, 47, 48% or so, would be on the legislature and the judiciary.
So what you're saying is that it's the people who've manned Parliament, it's the people
Yes.
who've manned the executive who are to blame, not the Constitution. In other words, as Ambedkar said, if men are vile, there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Dr. Ambedkar also said, and Dr. Rajendra Prasad also said that listen, if we give you a document, called a constitution, which is not good, right? But the people are good, or the people, the rulers, so to speak, are good. You will still have an excellent, governing system. So you can't blame the constitution under any circumstances.
Let me raise a second criticism with you. The Constitution also created a federal structure, but again, it's given the center overriding authority over the states, both financially and administratively, but also in terms of the fact that Parliament has the power to rearrange the federal map. It can convert states into union territories, it can break up states and partition them. This may have been considered necessary at independence when India was thought to be a weak and fragile country, but is it still necessary three-quarters of a century later?
Again, on the federal structure, for example, I don't think, the Constituent Assembly ever imagined that, on the whims and fancies of the executive, with the support of Parliament, you can break up states into union territories or break up states into smaller states unless the people want it. So you would have a situation, where Himachal Pradesh, for example, was carved out of the Punjab, right? Because the people wanted it. Or you have, Uttarakhand coming out of Uttar Pradesh and Andhra being split up into Andhra and Telangana. Why? Because the people wanted it. But where the people are not necessarily involved in the decision making process, and the executive says, I'm going to do this because I want to do it. That's where the problem arises. So I don't think the Constituent Assembly ever imagined, a situation like this happening. But yes, you see, the relationship between the states and the union or the center is one of partnership. You make your laws which are good for your state. We will make laws which are good for the country. That's why you have legislative lists. But yeah, sometimes, there might be an overlap, in which event, because Parliament represents the entire country, the people of your state as well, parliamentary laws will have precedence. You also had a situation, like the Wildlife Protection Act, where the states did not want separate legislation. So they requested Parliament that, you make a legislation for the entire country, and Parliament came out with the Wildlife Protection Act. So they gave that power, or they gave that authority to Parliament. So it's a partnership, kind of arrangement.
But you're making a very interesting and important point. Whether we're talking about the criticism that the legislature has been subordinated to the executive, or whether we're talking about the criticism that the federal structure operates with a bias in favor of the center and against the states. In either case, you're saying the truth is that it all depends upon the nature, the quality, the caliber, and the intentions of politicians at the state or the central level, at the parliamentary or the executive level. In other words, it's man that has made the difference between a good constitution functioning well and a good constitution functioning poorly.
Yes, yes. In the recent past, for example, we've been talking about resort politics, right? Or the purchase, so called purchase of legislators. How does that happen? If a person says, listen, I'm willing to switch sides, you give me a certain amount of money, or you put me up in a resort for a month or 2 weeks or whatever, I'm going to change, whatever my thinking is. When you have situations like that, how can you blame the constitution? You have to blame the persons.
So you're saying the Indian constitution is a good constitution, but at critical moments it's been let down by the Indian people operating it. It's been let down by the very politicians who are elected to honor it. That's the problem.
Yes, yes. And again, when you have the system of checks and balances, all right, you have the judiciary. Sometimes, the judiciary has also not stepped in at the appropriate time, but there are occasions when it has stepped in at the appropriate time. Okay, so yeah, it's a collective sort of a thing.
Let me raise another criticism. This time, I don't think it's connected with the way politicians have honored the Constitution. It may be more directly to do with the nature of the Constitution itself. The Constitution conferred several fundamental rights on Indian citizens, but stopped short of an absolute right to freedom of speech and expression. In fact, free speech can be restricted on grounds of morality, defamation, and even friendly relations with foreign states. Do those restrictions go too far?
Yes, I think these three that you are talking about, yeah, I think we need to have a rethink about them. Things like morality. All right, how do you define morality? Something that is immoral for you may be acceptable to me, and vice versa. All right, relations with foreign countries. Somebody can shout from the rooftop about relations with a particular foreign country. It won't make a difference because that is the foreign policy of the government, and the government should know how to tackle it. Defamation, I think, should be completely out. Something like criminal defamation is being misused and abused in the recent past. That, I think, cannot be, a restriction on the freedom of speech. You have the courts. If somebody defames somebody, go to the court, get damages. But yeah, these three things we certainly need to have a rethink.
So you do agree that the original constitutional definition of what constitutes free speech and the restrictions that were placed upon it, those restrictions were unnecessary in some instances?
They are unnecessary as on today. I'm not sure what was the position in the 1947 to 1950 or immediately after that. Maybe
Would restrictions in terms of friendly relations with foreign states have been necessary even in 47?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, India is a sovereign nation. It was emerging as a sovereign nation. Defamation also, I don't think so. I'm not sure about morality. What was it that compelled the Constituent Assembly to bring in morality?
Now, earlier in this interview, you referred to the emergency and said that it was a problem created because of the character, nature, and overweening power of Indira Gandhi. Let me put an opposite view to you. The emergency happened not by suspending the Constitution, nor by acting outside of the Constitution. It happened by imposing the Constitution's own mechanisms. Did that expose a weakness or a flaw in the Constitution?
No. You see, the purpose of an emergency is not to protect the election of the Prime Minister. All right? That was I don't think the Constituent Assembly ever imagined, that emergency would be declared so that, the election of the Prime Minister, of the verdict of the court setting aside the election of the Prime Minister could be nullified and everybody in the opposition put behind bars and so on. An emergency is a situation where something emergent has happened. When we had the war with China, for example, in 62, emergency was declared, external emergency. Why? Because there was an emergency, you know. So again, it's, how you operate
But
the.
aren't you saying what I'm saying in a different form? The emergency happened in 75 because the constitution, as it was framed, permitted Indira Gandhi to use the emergency clause even when there was no emergency in the country. In other
Right.
words, there was no safeguard against misuse. It's
Yeah.
that absence of safeguard I'm talking about.
Yes, yes, yeah. There is an absence of safeguard, but supposing Parliament had stood up at that point of time. We are talking about subordination of Parliament to the executive. Supposing the Parliament had stood up at that point of time and said, "Oh, sorry, we don't think there's any need for an emergency. Why are you putting everybody behind bars?" The courts could have very well said habeas corpus petitions were filed. Why are you putting these people behind bars?
And you don't think that's a weakness in the constitution?
No, no, because I think the Constituent Assembly did not, expect this to happen, because that would be against the spirit of the Constitution. We have to talk about the spirit of the Constitution. We have to talk about constitutional morality. So once you accept these principles, that there is a spirit behind the Constitution, there is something called constitutional morality. You can't say it's the weakness of the Constitution.
The problem is that the constitution assumes that all the people who are operating the constitution will be imbued with the spirit of constitutional morality. Because
Yes.
it's the spirit of constitutional morality that determines whether you're functioning in keeping with the spirit of the constitution. You could be observing its letter, but out of sync with its spirit. And now we know, just to take two examples, that governors and election commissioners have often breached constitutional morality, and there's very little that we can do about it.
Yeah.
Again, isn't that lacuna a weakness in the constitution? Should it not have devised a way of ensuring that actors observe both the letter and the spirit? That spirit can be ignored, and there's nothing the constitution can do about it.
Yeah, but again, we come back to the people, who are operating the Constitution. Now, for example, the Election Commission, all right, if it is not acting in accordance with the spirit of the Constitution, you have the courts which can check it, all right. You have Parliament which can check it. But if they say, no, we're not going to do anything about it, what do you do? You know,
So we're back again to that point we made earlier. India has a good constitution, but frequently at critical moments, the wrong people or people who are incapable of living up to their responsibilities have made problems.
yeah. You see, now, you mentioned about governors, all right. The Constitution says that when the state legislature passes an act and it goes to the governor should look into it. And if there are some doubts, he can, of course, express those doubts. But then he must accept the will of the legislature. The Constitution does not say, and it cannot say, that you must decide within 15 days or you must decide within 30 days. And we've had instances of the governors sitting over these, bills or acts for months together, for years together. Now, what is to be done? The Supreme Court could have intervened and said, listen, we are giving a direction to the governor. But the Constitution says that, listen, we we are expecting, the Constituent Assembly says, we're expecting good people to be there. But if they, misuse the discretion that is given to them, what do you do? There have been instances where, the speaker has not taken a decision under the 10th schedule. Why? All that the Supreme Court can say is that, listen, you take a decision. We'll give you time, 3 months. Okay, that's good enough.
We're talking, Justice Lokur, about how at critical moments people have let down the Constitution.
Yeah.
Not the Constitution that's let the country down, but people, politicians, officials, and others have let down the Constitution. Let's expand that discussion a little. The Constitution, as you know, is based upon a separation of powers between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. In 1973, the Supreme Court created the Basic Structure Doctrine to protect the core of the Constitution. On the other hand, with ADM Jabalpur, many people believe it buckled under the executive during the emergency, and some say it buckled under the executive's pressure even with the Ayodhya judgment. And it certainly failed to protect the statehood of Jammu and Kashmir in 2019. So, my question is, how effective a guardian of the Constitution has our Supreme Court been?
Well, there have been aberrations, like you said. ADM Jabalpur was a terrible judgment. There's no doubt about it. But on the other hand, introducing the basic structure doctrine was very, very important. And I think that is something that has saved the Constitution in that sense. Otherwise, a strong executive could have just, wiped out the fundamental rights chapter, for example. Okay. And, like it was done during the emergency, the life of Parliament was extended beyond the 5-year period. Could have said, very well, we'll have it for 10 years. So, the Supreme Court must be given the credit for some things that it has done. It must be faulted for some things that it should have done but did not do. ADM Jabalpur is one of them. Protecting the statehood of Jammu and Kashmir, I think, is it's a great mistake. The Supreme Court should have taken a decision when the case came up before it. Otherwise, to say that, listen, we are going to wait for another case to come up or a different opportunity to come up. Well, second time the same thing may happen. Third time the same thing may happen. So yes, I think the Supreme Court and some of the cases which I think should have been decided quickly by the Supreme Court in the recent past have been inordinately delayed.
Let's look at another novel feature that the Supreme Court created, this time to protect the independence of the judiciary. Unlike what was the practice for the first 4 or 5 decades, judges are now chosen by judges themselves, not by the executive. And this was meant to protect the independence of the judiciary. Has it worked? Or has it made little difference to the quality of people chosen as judges? In other words, is there a significant difference in the type of people becoming judges post 2000 compared to the 60s, 70s, and 80s?
It's difficult to say. When the collegium system of recommending judges came into operation, we've had good appointments even after that. There's no doubt about it. But we've had some appointments which perhaps people have had second thoughts about. In the past, before the collegium system came, and it was the executive which was controlling the shots, so to speak, there have been instances where persons who were appointed for political reasons, right? So yeah, it's been a mixed bag all along. But as on today, the independence of the judiciary, I think, is under a severe test because, again, what about the spirit of the Constitution? The judiciary wants the judiciary to be independent. I'm not sure about the executive. So the executive would, all along, always, I suppose, have a judiciary that favors it. So now today, the executive is getting an upper hand. What is going to be the consequence of that? I don't want to try and imagine.
But this worries you.
It worries me. Yeah, certainly it does. It does.
And it's clearly not in keeping with the spirit of the Constitution.
Yes. Or with constitutional morality.
And the inability or the reluctance, maybe that's a better word because they're capable if they want to, they're just reluctant to exercise those powers. But the inability or reluctance of the judiciary to ensure that the collegium system actually functions the way it's intended to, and that the executive is required to accept as judges those nominated by the collegium. That inability or reluctance is becoming a problem, isn't it?
Yes, it is. The solution to that, in my opinion, is a dialogue between the executive and the judiciary. I can tell you one instance. When I was in the larger collegium of 5 judges, there was some issue. I don't even remember what the issue was, but there was some issue, and the Chief Justice of India requested the then law minister to come to the Supreme Court so that we could have a discussion about that issue. Tea was served. Before we could finish the tea, the problem was solved. Okay, so we just sat across the table.
Do you really believe that the problem you're having getting judges nominated by the collegium, accepted by the government, can be sorted out over a cup of tea? The problem is that the government doesn't like the independence of those judges. It fears that those judges will be bold and upright and will give judgments that are not in the government's interest. A cup of tea won't sort that problem out. The government has to accept independence as a virtue. It doesn't like the idea of it.
Absolutely. Like I said earlier, every executive would want a judiciary that favors it. All right. That's why we had talk about a committed judiciary in the 1970s. There's no doubt about it. But is there any harm in talking about it, in having a dialogue? Perhaps.
What about going one step further?
Yeah.
When the government of the day repeatedly refuses to accept nominations by the collegium, which have been not just reiterated, but reiterated 2 or 3 times, surely the stage has come for the court to take contempt action.
Yes. But will that solve the problem? You send the law minister to jail. Will it solve the problem?
It'll certainly ensure that the next law minister won't behave the same way. No law minister wants to go to jail.
I am not too sure about that. If the executive wants to act tough, the judiciary, it is said a long time back by Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist, the judiciary does not have control over the purse strings. It does not wield the sword.
But you're saying something particularly worrying. You're saying if the prime minister of the day who heads the government, from whom the law minister gets the defiance to act the way he does, if the prime minister of the day is determined to defy the judiciary, to do what he wants regardless of the constitutional requirements that go otherwise, there's nothing that can be done. In other words, if a prime minister is determined to be dictatorial, that's it. You have to accept it. Is that what you're suggesting? Because it sounds like it.
Yeah, it sounds like it, yes. What about Parliament? Is the Parliament going to say that, listen, we have no objection if the judiciary is compromised? Why can't Parliament say something about it? Why can't Parliament discuss this?
So then underlining the problem that we've 3-4 times referred to in this interview, that India has a good constitution which has been let down at critical moments by the people who are elected to operate it. Yeah. And you're saying that if the prime minister, whether it's the one of today or an earlier prime minister, Indira Gandhi, whether it's Narendra Modi or Indira Gandhi, are determined to be dictatorial, there's nothing that can be done about it.
Well, there is very little that can be done about it, but something can be done about it, which is for the people to ask questions of Parliament, their elected representatives. What are you guys doing, right? Of the people of the state asking their elected representatives in the state legislature.
Right. Eventually, it's the people who are the voters who have to ask the question of those they voted to power. How dare you behave in this way, and throw them out? That happened to Indira Gandhi in 1977. It could happen to other prime ministers since then. Certainly, Mr. Modi's majority was taken away from him in 2024. But the constitution has no check against dictatorial behavior. That's the problem. That's what you're suggesting.
Yeah. In a sense, it doesn't. That's why we had the emergency. And that's why we
that is not a weakness in our constitution.
Well, if you put it in that fashion, yeah, it could be a weakness in our constitution. But then again, did the members of the Constituent Assembly did they visualize that the people who are being elected would act in this manner? Forget about the spirit of the Constitution. Forget about constitutional morality. Did they expect that? I don't think they expected that. So we have not only let down the Constitution, but we've let down the members of the Constituent Assembly. We've let down Dr. Ambedkar.
So we're ending up, and I'm repeating this perhaps for the fourth or fifth time, with the following conclusion. India has a good constitution. It's lasted 75 years. It's been malleable enough to adapt to the changing requirements over 7 decades, which is why it's accepted amendments. But, and that but is critical, at important moments of time, the constitution has been let down by the defiance, by the willfulness, by the dictatorial behavior of individuals who were elected to operate the constitution, whether it's Indira Gandhi in the 70s, whether, as you're suggesting, it's Narendra Modi at the moment, or whether it's other politicians at other times. At critical times, the Indian constitution has been let down by those very people whose job is to honor it, i.e., politicians, as well as often by those very people whose job is to defend it, i.e., judges. It's been let down by both.
Yeah, yeah, and also Parliament.
And Parliament.
They are the people we are electing.
So, at the end of the day, Ambedkar was absolutely right.
Yeah, at the end of
Good constitution can be rendered a poor product if the people operating it and defending it deliberately choose not to do so properly.
You're right, absolutely. Dr. Ambedkar was spot on.
Justice Lokur, thank you very much for joining me today to assess the way the Indian Constitution has functioned and to point out something that quite often we in our country ignore. We have a good constitution we can be proud of. But at critical moments, be it in Indira Gandhi or in Narendra Modi or other politicians, be it judges of the Supreme Court, at critical moments, people whose job is to honor the Constitution, people whose job is to defend the Constitution, have let the Constitution down.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you summed it up perfectly. Again, I would say Parliament also.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you. All the best.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.